Welcome to Inspirations by Dr. Gail. Today's episode is titled, When Grief Comes. This is part 6 of my resiliency series, Making Lemonade Out of Lemons. In this series, I share true stories and practical strategies to help us bounce back from adversity and continue to move forward towards our healthy dreams and goals no matter who or what comes against us. The 1994-95 school year was a rough one for me. At the time, I was an English teacher at a high school in Southern California. Many of my students came from challenging backgrounds, but most were hardworking, eager to learn, and well-behaved. During that school year, my students weren't the reason why that year was so difficult for me, but 3 other factors were. First, in September, there was a freak rainstorm that lasted for several days. This storm damaged the roof of my classroom so severely that tiles actually began to fall from the ceiling. By the time the storm ended, 16 tiles had fallen, and I was constantly having to move students' desks to protect them from being injured by a falling tile. To make matters worse, during that same month, I started getting death threats on my classroom telephone. This meant that the anonymous male caller was telephoning me from someplace on campus. I received several of these disturbing calls that always began with profanity and ended with the words, "I'm going to kill you," before I found out that the caller was an 18-year-old student who hated black people. This student had never been enrolled in any of my classes, but his death threats and other disturbing behaviors caused a lot of stress for me. During the 7-month period when he was sending death threats and directing other troubling behaviors at me, I also learned that one of my younger sisters was sick. As children, we had been very close. We played with dolls and made homemade paper doll families together. In high school, she sat behind me in our geometry class, and at one point, when our home life became unbearable, we sat in the school cafeteria and planned to run away from home. During her illness, I visited my sister in the hospital, spoke with her on the telephone each week, and kept praying for her full recovery. 6 weeks after she became ill, we had a very long and candid telephone conversation. 3 days later, she had to be hospitalized again and was told that she would soon die. When I went to visit her in the hospital, my sister only regained consciousness once. Several hours later, as I sat in her room, she died quietly. Although my father had died when I was 13 years old, the death of this sister devastated me. At her funeral, I was inconsolable. The next day, I was too depressed to get out of bed. A few days later, in spite of my grief, I had to return to work where the student who hated black people continued to harass me. I coped with my grief over my sister's death by eating. I've always been an emotional eater, and this was my way of trying to numb my pain. Within a few months, I had gained 25 pounds. Since my sister's death more than 20 years ago, both of my brothers, several extended family members, a close friend, 2 neighbors, acquaintances, and co-workers of mine have died. Obviously, my experiences with losing loved ones isn't unique. Tragedy, adversity, and death are common occurrences. None of us will live forever, neither will our friends, acquaintances, and family members. This means that no one can escape from experiencing the type of grief that comes from losing a loved one, and each of us will handle grief in our own unique way. There are many types and many causes of grief, but one of the worst occurs when a parent loses a child as a result of death. No sane and loving parent wants to outlive his or her child. In spite of this, many parents have found admirable ways of handling this type of grief. So please stay tuned to hear resiliency stories about the remarkable ways that 5 parents handled their grief. Thomas Dorsey was born in a small town in Georgia. His father was a Baptist preacher and his mother was a church organist. Throughout Thomas's childhood, his family struggled financially. When they moved to Atlanta, he was bullied at school and had a hard time fitting into his new school and church. At age 11, Thomas dropped out of school and began to work in a vaudeville theater. When he reached adulthood, he moved to Chicago and became, quote, a successful composer and pianist of jazz and blues music, unquote. Thomas played the piano in many clubs and at parties, but at age 21, he suffered a nervous breakdown. He eventually recovered, got married, and continued to compose and play music. But according to a PBS article, when he had a second nervous breakdown, he couldn't play music anymore and was ill for 3 years. More adversity was in his future. According to that PBS article, quote, when Thomas decided to devote himself to gospel music, mainstream churches rejected his songs. Then, in August 1932, his life was thrown into crisis when his wife and son died during childbirth. In his grief, Thomas turned to the piano for comfort. The tune he wrote, "Take My Hand, Precious Lord," came, he said, directly from God, unquote. In spite of all the adversity that he experienced, during his lifetime, Thomas Dorsey composed hundreds of songs, led gospel choirs, and became known as the father of gospel music. Many artists, including Elvis Presley, have recorded "Take My Hand, Precious Lord," which became Thomas Dorsey's most popular song. Aretha Franklin sang it at the funeral of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. My playlist includes versions of this song by Aretha Franklin, Mahalia Jackson, and Whitley Phipps. In addition to listening to their beautiful versions, I often sing this song to encourage myself. Here's a snippet of my version. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home when my way grows drear. Precious Lord, linger near, and when my life is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand, lest I fall, please take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home. Like Thomas Dorsey, Horatio Spafford experienced a lot of adversity during his lifetime. According to the Library of Congress and other online sources, quote, in 1871, Horatio Spafford was a prosperous lawyer and devout Presbyterian church elder. He and his wife Anna were living comfortably with their 4 young daughters in Chicago. But in that year, the Great Fire broke out and devastated the entire city. When the Great Fire of Chicago reduced the city to ashes, it also destroyed Horatio's income. For the next 2 years, he and Anna devoted their time to welfare work among the refugees of the fire. Then the family decided to vacation with friends in Europe. At the last moment, Horatio was detained by business, and Anna and the girls went on ahead, sailing on an ocean liner. On November 21st, 1873, the ocean liner was rammed by a British vessel and sank within minutes. Anna was rescued, but the 4 children had drowned. 9 days after the shipwreck, Anna landed in Wales and cabled this simple message to Horatio: "Saved alone, what shall I do?" After receiving Anna's telegram, Horatio immediately left Chicago to bring his wife home. On the Atlantic crossing, the captain of the ship called Horatio to his cabin to tell him that they were passing over the spot where his 4 daughters had perished. As he passed over their watery grave, Horatio wrote a hymn that is still popular today. The title is "It Is Well With My Soul," unquote. Like Thomas Dorsey's Precious Lord, many artists have recorded their own versions of "It Is Well With My Soul." My playlist includes beautiful versions by Richard Smallwood and Phil and Brenda Nicholas. But I often sing this song to myself in the privacy of my home. So here's my version. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Thomas Dorsey and Horatio Spafford handled their grief by writing hymns, but 2 other parents that I know chose to write books. I met one of these parents, Ricardo Harris, many years ago after I gave a presentation in Kansas. At that time, he was a local educator and church pastor. In 2008, Ricardo's 19-year-old son, Robert, was driving his car and stopped at an intersection. When another car pulled up alongside of him, Robert innocently glanced at the driver of the other car. Within seconds, the driver of that car pulled out a gun and began to shoot at Robert. It turned out that the shooter was a gang member who didn't like the way that Robert had looked at him. Although Robert had never been in a gang and had actually tried to convince youth to stay out of gangs, one innocent look at this stranger cost him his life. In A Life Lost, Saving a Generation, Ricardo Harris spoke extensively about his son's death. According to Ricardo, I could not believe it. I could not believe that my son was dead. A part of me felt that God had let me down. Even though he's gone, he's definitely not forgotten. He's still a part of us. We talk about him every single day, unquote. After Robert's death, Ricardo did several surprising things. It started when he appeared in court to face his son's murderer, 19-year-old Brandon Hardaway. Ricardo said, "I was expecting to see a monster, but when they escorted him into the courtroom, I see this kid, this little boy. And I told him, I will not hold hatred and bitterness in my heart for you. I said, my Bible says that if I do not forgive, then God will not forgive me," unquote. Hardaway was sentenced to 24 years in prison and apologized to the family. Today, Ricardo Harris serves as the executive director of a Gear Up program at Wichita State University, and he continues to pastor a church. Since his son's death, in addition to forgiving Hardaway, he has channeled his grief into 2 other outlets. First, he has devoted his life to empowering youth by, quote, promoting education and character building as an alternative to the senseless violence that plagues many urban communities. Ricardo strives to help youth avoid becoming victims and perpetrators of violence." Unquote. He also wrote a book titled Misery to Motivation, A Father's Story, about the death of his son. Here's how he summarized his attitude about adversity and grief. "All of us, I don't care who we are, experience bad situations, and how we respond to those bad situations really determines what kind of people we are." Unquote. In February 2019, my husband and I participated in Detroit Book City's African American Family Book Expo. At this event, which was hosted by Janice Haynes, we met many other authors and book lovers. One of the authors who made a powerful impact on me was Cheryl Morgan Houston. Like Thomas Dorsey, Horatio Spafford, and Ricardo Harris, Cheryl and her husband lost a child to death. In their case, their son Havens was their only child. According to Cheryl, Havens had a great personality. He was friendly, independent, and had a natural talent for acting. During his childhood, Cheryl kept Havens involved in church and tried to make each of his birthdays a special event. When he turned 16, she hosted a backyard barbecue to celebrate this milestone birthday. In 2003, Havens graduated from high school and was employed at 2 jobs. 2 years later, as he was driving his car, he noticed a car accident and quickly ran to help the victims. Sadly, while Havens was being a good Samaritan, he was hit by 2 other cars and died. His death shattered his parents. However, quote, "After almost a decade of hurting, wondering, caring, praying, and healing, Cheryl said that she began to live again." Unquote. In I Was Broken-Hearted, Havens' Legacy, the book that Cheryl wrote, she said, "I'll never forget our son Havens, his life, or his departure, but I feel I can now live." Unquote. In addition to writing this book, she has become a foster parent, and she helps parents and others who have experienced loss cope with their grief. Like all of the other parents that I've described in this episode of Inspirations by Dr. Gail, Susan Toller Carr has channeled her grief into efforts to help others. I met Susan during our freshman year of college when we lived on the same dorm floor. Even as a young college student, she had very strong maternal instincts and was always trying to help others. She quickly became the person who tried to help the African American girls in the dorm acclimate to the university by hosting get-togethers in her room. After graduation, Susan became a highly successful engineer, got married, and had a son, Justin. I'll never forget the huge smile on her face and how she beamed with pride when she introduced Justin to me and other guests at one of her birthday parties. Susan and her husband Daryl did everything that they could to be great parents to Justin. They made sure that he attended outstanding schools, was involved in extracurricular activities, and had a strong moral foundation. One of Susan's biggest dreams was for Justin to attend the same university that she had attended, and Justin rose to the challenge. He was a high-performing student, won numerous awards, drew and painted amazing artwork, sang in his school's madrigal and chamber music groups, excelled in many sports including volleyball, basketball, water polo, acted and sang in plays and musicals, had a great sense of humor, and volunteered for many organizations including food banks. Justin was also a member of his school's swim team. On February 22, 2013, Justin was a high school junior. He had a very busy day at school. His day included swim practice and attending a musical later that evening. At the beginning of swim practice, Justin and his teammates sang and danced to one of Beyoncé's songs. Then they dove into the pool in order to strengthen their swimming skills. What happened next changed Susan and Daryl's lives forever. Quote, soon after he completed his normal workout, Justin became distressed in the pool, and he was unable to be resuscitated. Later, his family and physicians discovered that Justin had an undiagnosed heart condition called idiopathic hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, unquote. Since that tragic day, I've seen and spoken to Susan and Daryl many times. They make it clear that Justin is always on their minds, and their pain over losing their only child is still very obvious. Justin packed a lot of living into his 16 short years on this earth and made a positive impact on many individuals. His biggest dream was to live in a world that was peaceful and safe for every single person. Through the Justin Carr Wants World Peace Foundation, Susan and Daryl are spreading this message. In addition to honoring Justin's dream through this foundation, they share his amazing artwork and host numerous educational and empowerment events, including providing free heart screenings. Susan has also become very involved in college counseling, mentoring, providing personalized grief counseling, speaking at conferences, and conducting grief counseling workshops for school leaders, teachers, and parents. She has also unofficially adopted many of Justin's friends. Here's the main point that I hope that you'll take away from this episode of Inspirations by Dr. Gail. At various points in our lives, each of us will have to deal with grief. At these times, it's important for us to be patient, kind, and loving towards ourselves, but we also have choices. Although we will continue to miss our departed loved ones, one of those choices is that we can choose not to stay in a state of grief or mourning forever. Instead, like the resilient parents whom I described in this episode, we can choose to use our grief in ways that will honor our departed loved ones and also empower others. Please stay tuned for this week's Personal Empowerment Challenge. This episode's Personal Empowerment Challenge consists of 3 exercises. In your notebook or journal that I recommend that you use specifically for each episode's challenges, please do the following. Number 1, write a few sentences that explain your beliefs about death. For example, although my sister's death was traumatic for me, I eventually was able to get out of bed, fight depression, stop binge eating, and move forward because of my faith in God and core beliefs about death. I believe that my sister is no longer suffering. I believe that she is in a better place. I believe that I will see her again under better circumstances, and these beliefs helped me move forward instead of being immobilized by my grief. Number 2, examine your core beliefs about death and explain how they can keep you from moving forward or help you to continue to move forward towards your healthy dreams and goals. Number 3, if you are currently grieving, list at least 3 strategies that you can use to keep moving forward and to get through each day with your emotional, spiritual, and physical health intact. For example, writing a letter, poem, or song about your departed loved one may help you release a lot of painful emotions. Seeking counseling from a qualified grief counselor and Googling the stages of grief may be helpful to you. Listening to previous episodes of Inspirations by Dr. Gail, such as What If I Had Killed Myself? And Your Big Picture, starting at the end instead of the beginning, can be helpful to you because of the great personal empowerment strategies included in these episodes. And then finally, please share these strategies that are helpful to you and the stories that you heard in this particular episode with individuals in your network who are currently experiencing grief. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you'll tune in next time to hear Mislabeled. This is part 7 of my resiliency series, Making Lemonade Out of Lemons. For more information about Inspirations by Gail, LLC, including learning how you can book me for a speaking engagement or to conduct a professional development or empowerment workshop, or learn how you can purchase my books, please visit my website, www.drgailthompson.com. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to this podcast through my website, or you can do this through my YouTube channel, Inspirations by Gail. And please remember to hit the like button and tell your networks about this podcast. If you're interested in the theme music for this podcast, please check out music by Aaron Nimbus through iTunes and Apple Music. In the meantime, please remember this. At various points in our lives, each of us will have to deal with grief. At these times, it's important for us to be patient, kind, and loving with ourselves. And although we'll continue to miss our departed loved ones, we can choose not to stay in a state of grief or mourning forever. Instead, like the resilient parents whom I described in this episode, we can choose to use our grief in ways that will honor our departed loved one and also empower others. Until next time, hugs and blessings. I'm Dr. Gail L. Thompson.